"The nanny is poisoning your son," the 4-year-old homeless girl told the millionaire about the trusted nanny. "So they install hidden cameras, and what they record makes everyone cry. Comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help." The scream echoed through Richard Huntington's luxurious apartment at 3 in the morning, slicing through the silence like a blade. At 42, the entrepreneur was used to sleepless nights since Sarah, his wife, had left for psychiatric treatment in Boston 3 months ago. But David's, his 6-year-old son's, nightmares were becoming increasingly frequent and intense. Richard rushed down the hallway of the penthouse in Chicago, his bare feet hitting the cold marble. He found the boy huddled in bed, his small body trembling under the sweat-soaked sheet. "Daddy, she said Mommy is never coming back," David sobbed, his brown eyes shining with terror in the dark. "Who said that, son?" Richard sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the boy into a protective hug. But David just shook his head, as if he was afraid to say a name out loud. Isabel Meyer had come into their lives like a blessing in disguise. At 35, she had impeccable references from families in high society in Greenwich, Connecticut, spoke 3 languages, and had a degree in education. When Richard hired her 2 months ago, she seemed like the perfect solution to take care of David while he ran his chain of restaurants, and Sarah recovered from the severe depression that had consumed her since their son's birth. "Isabel takes good care of you, doesn't she?" Richard asked, watching the boy's pale face. David nodded quickly, but something in the movement seemed forced, too automatic. The next day, Richard decided to work at the main office, located downtown. While reviewing the numbers of the fastest-growing franchise in Chicago, his attention was drawn to the activity in the square in front of the building. A little girl, appearing no more than 4 years old, sat alone on the bench near the fountain, her disheveled blonde hair shining in the afternoon sun. Penny. He had noticed the child several times in recent weeks, always in the same place, always alone. She wore worn but clean clothes and had a look that was too mature for her age. Sometimes Richard saw her talking to local shopkeepers who gave her water or a snack. The big city had its own silent codes of care. Around 5 in the afternoon, Richard went downstairs to buy coffee at the deli when Penny approached him. Her bright blue eyes stared at him with a disturbing seriousness. "Are you the father of the boy who lives in the tall building?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Richard stopped, surprised. "How do you know that? I see you leaving in the car sometimes." Penny hesitated, looking at her own feet. "The lady who takes care of him. She's not good." A shiver ran down Richard's spine. "What do you mean, she's not good?" "She says bad things to him when nobody is watching. Things that make you cry." Penny's eyes filled with tears. "I know that kind of person. She did that to me too." Before Richard could ask more questions, Penny ran away, disappearing among the trees in the square. He stood still for several minutes, the coffee forgotten, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. That night, Richard watched Isabel with renewed attention. She moved around the house with silent efficiency, preparing David's dinner with the meticulous care that had always impressed him. Her brown hair was tied in a perfect bun, her uniform impeccable. Everything seemed normal until he noticed how David avoided looking directly at her. "How was your day, champ?" Richard sat at the kitchen table, watching his son poke at the food on his plate. "It was good, Dad." The answer came out automatically, without emotion. "What did you guys do?" David glanced quickly at Isabel, who was smiling as she washed the dishes. "We played. We did homework." "He's a very obedient child," Isabel interjected, her melodious voice echoing through the kitchen. "He's never any trouble. Sometimes I even think he's too obedient for his age." Something in the way she said that made Richard narrow his eyes. There was a strange satisfaction in her voice, as if David's excessive obedience was a personal achievement. After Isabel retired to her quarters in the service area, Richard tried to talk to his son. "David, if something is bothering you, you can tell me, you know?" The boy looked up, and for a moment Richard saw a flash of despair there, but David just shook his head. "Nothing's wrong, Dad. Isabel takes good care of me." The words sounded rehearsed, like a scratched record repeating the same phrase. Richard felt his stomach clench. In the following days, he began to pay attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. David, who used to be a talkative and energetic child, now only answered when asked. His drawings, once colourful and cheerful, became dark and confused. The boy had stopped asking to talk to his mother on the phone. The most disturbing change was during meals. David ate each bite as if it were a painful obligation, chewing slowly, his eyes glazed over. When Richard asked Isabel about this, she explained with apparent concern that the boy was going through a difficult phase due to his mother's absence. "It's normal for children in his situation to develop some regressive behaviors," she said, her hands moving gracefully as she explained. "He needs structure and discipline now more than ever." Richard wanted to believe her. Isabel was qualified, experienced, and her references were genuine. He had checked them personally. But Penny's words echoed in his mind like a persistent alarm. That Friday, he decided to come home early, using the key silently so as not to announce his arrival. The apartment was too quiet. Richard tiptoed down the hallway, following the muffled sound of voices coming from David's room. The door was ajar. Through the crack, he saw Isabel sitting on the edge of the bed, her posture upright and intimidating. David was huddled against the headboard, his face pale and his eyes wide. "Your mother isn't coming back because she can't stand you anymore." Isabel's voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with a cold cruelty that made Richard's blood run cold. "She told me before she left, said you're a difficult child, that nobody can really love." David sobbed softly, and Isabel continued, "Your father is tired too. Soon he's going to ask me to take you away, to a place where troubled children like you stay, far away from normal families." Richard felt a fury so intense that his hands trembled, but something stopped him from bursting into the room immediately. He needed to understand the extent of what was happening. He needed concrete evidence. Isabel got up, smoothing her skirt with calculated movements. "Now let's have dinner. And remember, if you tell your father what we talked about, he'll know that you really are troubled. Good kids don't tattle." When she left the room, Richard backed away quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to act, but intelligently. That woman had turned his son into a shadow of himself, and he had no idea how long this had been going on. That night, while David slept fitfully after another nightmare, Richard made a decision that would change everything. The next day, he would install hidden cameras around the house. He needed to document what was happening, but more than that, he needed to protect his son in a way that he hadn't been able to protect Sarah from her own tortured mind. The following Monday, Richard hired a discreet security company to install micro cameras in strategic points around the house. While Isabel took David to the park, specialized technicians positioned almost invisible equipment in the living room, the boys' room, and the hallway. Richard lied to Isabel, saying it was a security measure due to recent break-ins in the neighborhood. "What a great idea, Mr. Huntington," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "David's safety is the most important thing." For the next 3 days, Richard followed the recordings religiously through the app on his cell phone. During the day, at the office, he divided his attention between the company spreadsheets and the images of his own home. What he saw left him increasingly disturbed. When she thought she was alone with David, Isabel transformed completely. Her posture changed, becoming rigid and intimidating. Her voice, normally sweet and melodious, gained icy and cutting tones. Richard documented dozens of moments where she whispered destructive phrases in the boy's ear. "Do you know why your mother left? Because you cried too much when you were a baby. She couldn't sleep. She got sick because of you," she said, as she tidied up the toys in the room with brusque movements. David remained motionless in bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. But it was on Thursday that Richard discovered something even more sinister. Through the cameras, he saw Isabel heading to the master bedroom, where the controlled medications that Sarah took for depression were kept. With precise movements, she opened the locked cabinet. How had she gotten the key? And removed several bottles. Richard zoomed in on the image on his cell phone, recognizing the labels of the expensive antidepressants and anxiolytics. Isabel counted the pills carefully, separating some into a small plastic bag that she kept in her purse. Then, she put the bottles back in place, adjusting them exactly in the original position. She was stealing Sarah's medication. The revelation hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. Not only was Isabel psychologically destroying his son, she was also committing theft. But why? The medications were valuable. She could certainly sell them for a considerable amount. That afternoon, he decided to confront Penny again. He found the girl on the same bench in the square, drawing on the ground with a piece of colored chalk. Seeing him approach, she looked up cautiously. "You were right about Isabel," Richard said, crouching beside her. "I need your help to understand what's going on." Penny stopped drawing, her small hands trembling slightly. "Do you believe me?" "I believe you, and I need you to tell me everything you know about her." The girl looked around, making sure they were alone. "She used to live in the house where I stayed before, with the family that took me in." Penny hesitated, the words coming out with difficulty. "She did the same things with the other boys. She said we were bad, that nobody would want to stay with us if they found out what we were really like." "What family was that?" "The Millers. They had a big house. They took care of several children who had nowhere to stay." Penny wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Isabel worked there, but she liked to make the children cry. She said it was for our own good." Richard felt nauseous. "Why did you leave there?" "Because I couldn't take it anymore. One night I ran away." Penny's eyes filled with tears. "But the other boys stayed there. I don't know what happened to them." "And where do you live now?" "I manage," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "There are people who help me sometimes. Mrs. Maria from the deli gives me bread. Mr. Joe from the newsstand lets me drink water from his tap." Richard's heart ached. That 4-year-old girl was living on the streets because she had fled a situation of psychological abuse with the same woman who was now taking care of his son. "Penny, I'm going to get Isabel out of my house, but I need to do it the right way, so that she can't hurt any more children." The girl nodded gravely. "She keeps things. Papers. Photos. She once said that if someone tried to send her away, she would tell secrets that nobody wanted other people to know." A chill ran down Richard. Blackmail. Isabel wasn't just a disturbed nanny. She was a calculating criminal. That night, he examined the recordings with even more attention, and he discovered something that terrified him. Isabel spent long hours in the Home Office, messing with his personal papers. Company documents, bank statements, Sarah's medical records. She had access to everything. On Friday morning, Richard made a decision. He called Robert Davis, his lawyer, and scheduled an urgent meeting. He needed to understand his legal options before acting. "Richard, this is very serious," Robert said after seeing some of the recordings. "You have evidence of psychological abuse, theft, and possibly blackmail. But we need to be strategic. If she really has compromising information about your family or company, she could use it as a weapon." "I don't care what she knows about me," Richard replied, clenching his fist. "My son is suffering every day. I need to protect him." "I understand. But think about Sarah, too. If Isabel exposes information about her psychiatric treatment, it could affect her recovery." That afternoon, Richard decided to come home early again. This time, he didn't try to be discreet. He wanted to observe how Isabel would react to changes in his routine. Upon entering the apartment, he found a scene that chilled him to the bone. David was sitting on the floor of the living room, completely still, while Isabel walked around him in slow circles. "Children who don't obey end up being abandoned," she said in a monotone voice. "Their parents realize that it's not worth the effort. It's better to have a quiet house than a troubled child." David did not react to the words. His eyes were fixed on a spot on the floor, as if he had completely disconnected from reality. "What's going on here?" Richard's voice echoed through the room, carrying an authority that made Isabel turn sharply. "Mr. Huntington, I'm glad you're home." Her transformation was instantaneous. The smile returned to her face, her posture softened. David was having a hard time. "Sometimes he gets like this, kind of absent. I was trying to bring him back to reality." Richard looked at his son, who remained motionless on the floor. He approached slowly and crouched beside the boy. "David, son, are you okay?" Slowly, very slowly, David looked up. When he saw his father, a solitary tear rolled down his cheek. "Dad, she said you don't want me anymore." The phrase was like a dagger to Richard's heart. He pulled his son into a tight hug, feeling the small body tremble against his chest. "That's not true, champ. I love you more than anything in the world." Over David's head, Richard stared at Isabel. She watched him with an expression he had never seen before, a mixture of defiance and cruel satisfaction. For a moment, the mask fell completely, and he saw the true nature of the woman he had let take care of his son. "I think it's best if you leave for today, Isabel," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "David will stay with me." "Of course, Mr. Huntington. Children need time with their parents." She picked up her purse, the same one where she kept the stolen medications, and headed for the door. But before leaving, she turned around one last time. "I hope you understand that sometimes the most painful truths are the ones children need to hear the most." The door closed with a soft click, but for Richard, the sound echoed like a threat. That night, while David finally slept peacefully beside him in bed, Richard made a final decision. The next day, he would fire Isabel. No matter the consequences, no matter what she might do, his son had suffered enough. But deep down, a sinister voice whispered that getting rid of Isabel wouldn't be as simple as he imagined. On Saturday morning, Richard woke up with an iron determination. He had spent the night drawing up a careful plan to fire Isabel without giving her time to carry out any retaliation. David had slept beside him for the first time in weeks without nightmares, but the boy still whispered fragmented phrases during his sleep. "Don't tell anyone. Troubled child. Nobody will want you." At 8 in the morning, Richard called Robert, waking the lawyer up on a Saturday. "I need you to come here now. I'm going to fire Isabel today, and I want you to witness everything." "Richard, wouldn't it be better to wait until Monday? We can prepare the proper documentation." "My son slept all night without screaming for the first time in months. Every minute that woman spends in my house is another minute of suffering for him." Robert sighed on the other end of the line. "All right. I'll be there in an hour." When Isabel arrived for her morning shift, she found Richard and Robert waiting in the living room. David was in his room, playing with some toys he had ignored for weeks, a small but significant sign that he was starting to recover. "Good morning, Mr. Huntington," Isabel said, her voice melodious as always. But Richard noticed that her eyes moved quickly between him and Robert, calculating the situation. "Isabel, I need to talk to you," Richard began, keeping his tone professional. "We've decided that we no longer need your services." Isabel's smile didn't waver, but something icy passed through her eyes. "May I ask why? I thought we were working very well together." "It's a personal decision. I'll pay you for the full month and an additional severance." Richard held out an envelope with the money. "I would like you to remove your belongings today." For a few seconds, a tense silence filled the room. Then slowly, Isabel began to laugh. It wasn't the sweet, controlled laughter that she always displayed, but something cold and calculating. "I see," she said, not taking the envelope. "You found the cameras, didn't you?" Richard felt his blood run cold. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his armchair. "What cameras?" Richard tried, but Isabel shook her head condescendingly. "Please, Mr. Huntington, do you think I wouldn't notice technicians installing equipment in the house? I'm very observant." She sat down on the sofa without being invited, crossing her legs elegantly. "The question is, what exactly did you see in those recordings?" "I saw enough," Richard replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Saw what? A dedicated nanny trying to discipline a traumatized child? A responsible professional explaining to a child why his mother had to leave?" Isabel tilted her head. "Or maybe you saw something more interesting." Robert leaned forward. "Madame, what are you insinuating?" "I'm insinuating that the cameras captured many interesting things in this house. For example, they captured Mr. Huntington making private calls to special clients of his restaurants, calls about services that are not listed on any official menu." Richard's stomach plummeted. During the past few weeks, he had made some confidential calls related to a tax evasion scheme involving some restaurants in the chain. Nothing big, just some manipulations in the accounting books to reduce taxes. Perfectly common in the area, but technically illegal. Those cameras also captured very interesting conversations about the real financial situation of your wife, Mr. Huntington, Isabel continued, her voice taking on a venomous tone. "About how her expensive medications are being paid for with undeclared money. About how her psychiatric treatment is being funded through a shell company." "This is blackmail," Robert said, trying to sound authoritative. "This is self-preservation," Isabel retorted. "I have copies of everything, audio recordings, photographed documents, detailed records. If Mr. Huntington wants me to leave his life quietly, he will have to pay a fair price for my silence." Richard felt as if the floor was disappearing beneath his feet. "How much do you want?" $200,000, transferred to an account that I will provide." Isabel smiled, and this time there was nothing sweet about that expression. "And an excellent letter of recommendation, of course. I need to keep working." "You're crazy if you think I'm going to pay that," Richard exploded, anger finally overcoming fear. "Then maybe we should call the IRS, or maybe the local newspapers. I imagine the headline would be interesting. Successful businessman uses dirty money to pay for treatment of crazy wife." The mention of Sarah made Richard stand up abruptly. "Leave my wife out of this. Your wife is at the center of all this, Mr. Huntington. In fact, there's something you should know about her and about me." Isabel paused dramatically. "We've known each other longer than you think." Robert and Richard exchanged confused glances. "Sarah and I met at Hope Institute in Boston. I was interned there for some disagreements with previous families. Problems of professional suitability, let's say." Isabel examined her nails. "Your wife felt very sorry for me. Said I needed a second chance, that I deserved to work with a family that valued me." Richard's world began to collapse. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Call her now. Ask her how she really met me." Isabel took her cell phone out of her purse. "Or better yet, I'll call myself. I'm sure Sarah will be very interested to know that you installed cameras to spy on me." Before Richard could react, Isabel was already dialing. The phone rang twice before a fragile voice answered on the other end. "Sarah, honey, it's Isabel. Yes, I'm fine. Listen, I need to tell you something about your husband." "Hang up that phone," Richard shouted, but Isabel moved away, keeping the call active. "He installed cameras to spy on me, sweetheart. Cameras all over the house. I think he suspects our arrangement." Richard snatched the phone from her hands, but the damage was done. On the other end of the line, he could hear Sarah crying and asking confused questions. "Sarah, it's not what you're thinking," he said quickly into the phone. "Richard, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me about the cameras? And what arrangement is Isabel talking about?" Sarah's voice was full of panic and confusion. "I can explain everything, but not over the phone. You need to come home now." "Come home? But my treatment isn't finished." "Sarah, please. David needs you. I need you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I'm coming home tonight." When Richard hung up, Isabel was smiling triumphantly. "Well, it looks like we're going to have an interesting family reunion. Sarah has always been very emotional, especially when she feels betrayed." "Get out of my house," Richard said, his voice dangerously low. "I'll leave, but I won't go far. You have 48 hours to think about my proposal. $200,000, or all the evidence I collected becomes public." Isabel grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "Oh, and Mr. Huntington, when Sarah arrives, be sure to ask her about the other families where I worked. About the other children I helped discipline. I'm sure she'll have interesting stories to tell." The door closed, leaving Richard and Robert in absolute silence. From the room came the sound of David calling for his father, his voice small and scared. "Dad? Why was the lady yelling?" Richard ran to the room and found his son huddled in bed, his eyes wide with fear. The progress he had made overnight had completely disappeared. "It was nothing, son. Isabel is gone." "Is she coming back?" The question came out in a terrified whisper. Richard hugged the boy, promising something he didn't know if he could fulfill. "No, David, she's never coming back." But even as he spoke the words, he knew that the battle was only just beginning. Sarah would return that night, and he would have to explain not only the cameras, but the whole truth about Isabel. And the truth, he was discovering, was much darker and more complicated than he had ever imagined. That afternoon, while waiting for his wife's arrival, Richard received a call that would change everything again. It was Penny. "Mister, she didn't leave. Isabel is at her friend Mariana's house. They're making plans." "Bad plans." Penny's call came at 4 in the afternoon, when Richard was already desperately waiting for Sarah. The little girl's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Mister, Isabel is at Mariana's house on Elm Street. I managed to hide near the window and I heard them talking." Penny paused, breathing heavily. "They're going to do something to your wife when she arrives." "What exactly did you hear?" Richard held the phone tightly, Robert beside him listening intently. "Isabel said that your wife has always been weak, that she can make her have a breakdown, that she knows exactly what to say to make her crazy again." Richard's blood ran cold. Sarah was in a fragile state, still recovering from severe depression. If Isabel managed to manipulate her psychologically, it could cause a devastating setback in her treatment. "Penny, are you safe where you are?" "Yes, I am. But, mister, there's one more thing. They talked about a medication. Isabel said she took medications from your house, and that if you mix it with other things, it can make the person very confused." Robert grabbed Richard's arm. "She may be planning to drug Sarah. That would be attempted poisoning." At 6 in the afternoon, Richard received a message from Sarah. "I'll be there at 8. I need to understand what's happening with our family." He had 2 hours to act. He called the police, but as Robert had predicted, without concrete evidence of a crime being committed, there was little they could do. He then decided to take a risky course of action. "Robert, you stay here with David. I'm going to Mariana's house." "Richard, this is dangerous. If she's really planning something, my wife is coming straight from the psychiatric hospital. If Isabel manages to manipulate her again, Sarah may never recover." The address Penny had provided led Richard to a simple house in a residential neighborhood. Through the living room window, he could see Isabel talking animatedly with a middle-aged brunette woman. On the table between them were several bottles of medication, the same ones that Richard recognized from his cabinet. Richard photographed the scene and called the police again, this time with visual evidence. While he waited, he decided to confront the 2 women directly. He knocked on the door forcefully. Mariana answered, looking nervous. "Where's Isabel?" he said without preamble. "Who? Don't lie to me." "I saw her through the window." Isabel appeared behind Mariana, still with that controlled smile. "Mr. Huntington." "What a surprise. What are you planning to do to my wife?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Isabel tried to close the door, but Richard stopped it with his foot. "I have a witness who heard you talking, and I photographed the stolen medications on the table." Isabel's smile finally disappeared. "Your witness is a street kid that nobody would take seriously." "Maybe, but the bottles of prescription medication in my wife's name are enough evidence." At that moment, sirens sounded in the distance. Isabel looked out the window and saw the patrol cars approaching. "You called the police!" Mariana panicked. "Isabel, you said it was just to scare them." "Shut up, you idiot!" Isabel exploded, all pretense of elegance disappearing. Everything would be perfect if he hadn't stuck his nose where it didn't belong. The police arrived, and with the photographic evidence and the stolen medications, arrested both women. But Richard knew that the real battle was still to come. At 8:30 that night, Sarah arrived at the apartment. She was pale and thin, her sunken eyes showing signs of intensive treatment. When she saw Richard, she started to cry. "Why didn't you tell me about the cameras? Why didn't you tell me you were suspicious of Isabel?" Richard hugged her carefully, feeling how fragile she was. "Because I wanted to protect you. I didn't want to add more stress to your treatment." "But I had the right to know. She was taking care of our son." "You're right. I made a mistake." Richard guided her to the sofa. "But now I need you to tell me the whole truth about how you met Isabel." Sarah cringed, avoiding his gaze. I was very bad at the institute. I couldn't even get out of bed some days. Isabel was interned for problems with previous families. She was very kind to me." "What kind of problems?" "She said that people didn't understand her methods of education, that she was too strict, and that scared the parents." Sarah paused, tears streaming down her face. She seemed so dedicated, so concerned about the well-being of the children. "Sarah, she was manipulating you, just like she manipulated our son." "I know that now," Sarah exploded. "Do you think I don't understand? I let a disturbed person take care of David because I was too sick to see the truth." At that moment, David appeared in the room, awakened by the sound of the argument. When he saw Sarah, he ran to her. "Mommy, you're back!" Sarah hugged him desperately, but Richard noticed how David remained tense in her arms. Months of psychological manipulation wouldn't disappear overnight. "Mommy, the lady said you were never coming back," David whispered. Sarah's heart broke. "What lady, my love?" "Isabel. She said you left because I'm a bad kid." Sarah looked at Richard in horror. How could she do that to a child? In the following days, the full truth about Isabel began to emerge. During her interrogation, it was discovered that she had worked for at least 5 families in the area in the past 3 years, always causing psychological trauma to the children before being fired or leaving on her own. Even more shocking was the discovery that Isabel suffered from a personality disorder that caused her to create unhealthy emotional dependencies with the children under her care. She deliberately sabotaged the children's relationship with their parents in order to become the sole source of support, even if that support was toxic. Dr. Helen Fisher, the psychologist who followed the case, explained to Richard and Sarah, "Isabel developed a pattern of behavior where she needs to feel indispensable. She destroys the self-esteem of the children in order to then position herself as the only person who understands them. It's a perverse form of emotional control." David's recovery process was long and painful. For weeks he continued repeating the destructive phrases that Isabel had implanted in his mind. Nightmares returned in full force, and there were times when he refused to speak to any adult. It was Penny who brought the first spark of hope. Richard had invited her to visit David, thinking that a child his age could help where adults failed. "You know what the lady used to tell me too?" Penny said to David during an afternoon in the living room. "That nobody would want me because I was difficult." But she was lying. "How do you know?" asked David, interested for the first time in days. "Because look how many people take care of me now. Your dad brought me here. Your mom made cookies for me. Uncle Robert helped me with some papers. Good people take care of kids even when they're sad." Slowly, David began to open up. And Richard made a decision that would change everyone's lives. He asked to begin the process of adopting Penny. "She saved our son," he said to Sarah, "and she needs a family as much as we need her." Sarah, still fragile but determined to rebuild her family, agreed. "David needs a sister, and I need a chance to be a mother the right way." 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, the reunited family was having breakfast on the apartment balcony. David laughed as he taught Penny how to make paper airplanes. Sarah, stronger every day, prepared pancakes in the kitchen. Richard watched the scene, still sometimes not believing in the transformation. The legal proceedings against Isabel resulted in her compulsory commitment for psychiatric treatment. Dr. Helen explained that, with proper monitoring, she could eventually recover and lead a normal life, away from children. "Hurt people hurt other people," Sarah explained to David one night when he asked why Isabel had been mean to him. "But that doesn't excuse what she did, and now she's getting help to get better." David nodded, processing the information with the surprising wisdom that trauma and recovery had given him. "And we got better too, right, Mom?" "Yes, my love. The whole family got stronger." The truth, Richard discovered, had truly set them all free. It hadn't been easy, and the scars were still visible. David still had occasional nightmares, Sarah still struggled with difficult days, and he himself still blamed himself for not having noticed the signs earlier. But they were together. They were a real family, imperfect, but built on honesty and genuine love. And through the balcony window, they could see the square where it all began, where a courageous girl had found the strength to warn a father about the danger that threatened his son. Penny now slept in the pink room that Sarah had decorated, especially for her, surrounded by drawings of birds, no longer symbols of escape, but of freedom won. And every night, before going to sleep, the family gathered for a simple prayer that David had invented. "Thank you for taking care of each other. Thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you for our family being real." The final image was always the most powerful. 4 people who had found each other through pain, but chosen to build something beautiful with the broken pieces of their lives. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.